as you guys know, John Nicholson does not need introduction, but I feel very privileged to actually introduce John Nicholson and Nicholas Rubin. So I'll give a little bit of a preface for both for vSAN, VxRail, and how it ties into my history at Spice World. I've been a green guy here since 2012, right? And for me, working at Dell is more than just a job, right? It's actually a passion because I love helping people. I love being part of SpiceWorks Forum because, it's part of it. We can see what customers want, what customers need, and address those needs, because we listen to you guys, right? And Dell actually does that. Right? We listen to people's feedback. We see how it addresses, customers' problems, how it addresses, world problems, right? So our vision as a company, right, is to help, enable the human progress, right, improve people's lives. And that's what it means for me to be part of this forum, part of this group, and working for Dell and, and Dell Technologies in general. About in 2013 at Spice World, I was launching Vertex. How many of you remember Vertex? Awesome, right? So it's a Dell first, kind of small business converged systems that we launched. And at the time, VMware was testing out vSAN. vSAN was a beta thing, right? About 30 people came by our table, including John Nicholson, right, and said, hey, are you guys going to put vSAN on it? This is an awesome thing. And I was like, what's vSAN? So I started digging into it. I'm like, this is an amazing product, and everybody wants it before it even launched, So it was a no-brainer for us, to embrace it. VMware as a company now, since then, they came together right under the umbrella of Dell Technologies, and we can see it flourishing and becoming one of the fastest products, growing in the market. As you guys know, right? So John Nicholson since then has been hired by VMware and works for them. And he's going to be doing the majority of the presentation. He's the senior technical marketing, I think, architect.
Lots of words,
Lots of words, yeah. I don't remember it by heart. And Nicholas Rubin is a senior principal engineer working on the VxRail team on the Dell side. Right, and so we're going to talk about vSAN. We're going to talk about VxRail, what's latest and greatest, that was launched at VMworld. And one thing I'm going to say before handing it off to them is talk about my favorite use case for VxRail and vSAN, right, which is mercy ships. Those of you who attended VMworld or Dell World have heard it from, from Pat Gelsinger, from Michael Dell talk about, have heard potentially the Jonathan Dyson, from mercy ships talk about it, right? So they chose Dell VxRail, right, because of how easy it is to manage to put on the newest ship that they're building right now. They're also using Isilon on the back end for storing X-rays, right? So the solution is so simple, right, that it can be launched on the floating hospital, right, to provide free medical care to thousands of people around the world where there's no medical care available for them, and that's what moves us, right? We can actually change the world. We can, how do we change the world? By helping one person at a time, right? And this is what it does for us. And at this, I'm going to hand it over.
Yeah, and thanks for that. I do like this example just because I feel like technology by itself is not necessarily good or evil in itself, but the applications of what we do with those. So talking about kind of why HCI, just we're going to get into what's new with VxRail, and we're going to get into what's new with vSAN, but I wanted to start with kind of what are the challenges and why we created this product. So when VMware looked around, we knew that customers wanted something that was simpler, that was easier. If you've been managing infrastructure for a long time, there often were a lot of different skill sets and things you had to bring together. And looking at kind of the problem statement when we, looking back at 2014 when we launched, the challenge is the storage products were not necessarily keeping up with what people were looking for in regards to that. And if we looked at what you were doing in-house and what I was doing in-house is, you would have a separate team or a group or a skill set that you had to manage the compute. You'd have to have that for the networking. Anyone here a networking admin? Yeah, a couple. They're the worst. But no, it's another hat you got to wear, creating VLANs and doing these things. And also storage was another silo. And so we were looking, I'm not going to use that word pane of glass, which I know will probably annoy some people, but we were looking to bring kind of this management together. And the first step of that, from our perspective, was bringing the storage in and simplifying this. And so what vSAN is, just as a quick level set, is this allows you to take standard VMware hosts, which are x86 servers, and have locally attached storage and pool that together in such a way that you've got redundancy and resiliency and data protection and data services. So that way, if something fails, something blows up, it's mirrored and protected across this. So in regards to our work with Dell, we've got quite a lot. We've got a lot of joint customers together, and we've got some choice there. And so we've got the traditional avenue that people may have had. They bring their servers, they bring their software and things like that. We call it the Ready Node program. With Dell, we've got a lot of different options. And then with VxRail, we really work together to create something special. Turnkey solution, being able to simplify everything from what you call the day zero experience, getting it out of the box, getting it racked, getting it set up, but also day 2, day 365, day 300, what it looks like from a patching and life cycle, and going through kind of that process within the environment. And looking at this, if you think about anyone manage life cycle or patching in their environment, if you do this, you'll realize that you've got your hypervisor, you've got drivers, you've got firmware, you've got BIOS, you've got all these different areas. And Nicholas is going to come up here and do a demo, and we're going to actually show you what this looks like. Because historically, you would have had to log into your out-of-band management devices and things like that. But with this, we've got the ability to simplify this process quite a bit. I'm going to pop out of my show here.
Awesome. Y'all hear me okay? Cool. So, just as John was talking about, really what we're doing with VxRail is trying to allow our customers to consume hyperconverged technology in a very turnkey fashion. And John alluded to, what we're doing around the support of VxRail is more than just certifying software in a box, but rather being able to bring them closer together. And then leverage our engineering and validation capabilities to rapidly life cycle the environment. So that's basically taking the VMware software components plus all of the underlying hardware, BIOS, firmware, drivers. And we test and validate a very strict and supported bundle with all of those components because, as you guys know, there's thousands of permeations of firmware and driver combinations along with the ESXi component that our customers have to go and test these things out in their environment to come to a set that's going to work for them. So we aim to change that for customers. So what you guys are looking at here on the screen is a look into our update function for VxRail. Which from an integration standpoint, we've taken VxRail Manager, so the lifecycle functions, and brought it into vCenter. So what you're looking at here is a screenshot of what I would engage with when I'm doing an upgrade. We just launched a few days ago our latest version of VxRail code, which sits on ESXi 6.7U3. And we've embedded this function into vCenter with the latest version, so it's all fully wrapped up into vCenter. So we create bundles, composite bundles with all of the hardware updates and software updates, and we package that together. That's known as a VxRail composite bundle. That is uploaded into the environment through internet connectivity to the support site, so support.emc.com. So what you see here is the current installed version that we're running, which is our 4.7.0 package, and we are upgrading to the newly available, in this case, 4.7.100 upgrade package. And you see here this little hyperlink can show me what's currently installed in the environment. I see what version of ESXi I'm running, what version of VxRail Manager I'm on, so on and so forth. And then we're going to perform a local upgrade. So we've uploaded the package, the composite bundle, which is located here. We select the bundle, and it uploads into VxRail Manager. This usually just takes a few minutes. Once this completes, then we will be able to kick off the upgrade. And what happens is we do a pre-check in the environment once the upgrade bundle is uploaded. We verify the health of the cluster, make sure there's no host in maintenance mode, make sure there's no critical errors. And then once that validation has passed, then we will kick off the upgrade. And the upgrade process is really meant to be seamless for customers. So we automate the entire functionality of upgrades. So once you kick off the upgrade, it's going to do you put in your vCenter credentials, your VxRail root credentials. Once you pass this screen, it's actually going to go and do the pre-check and then kick off the upgrade, and it will vMotion the VMs off of the first host, bring the host into maintenance mode, do all the upgrades necessary on the host, and then bring the host back online and do the same thing for every node in the cluster. I don't have to manually push a button to move it forward. It does it automatically. Here it's suppressing the cluster health monitor so that any alerts related to host being in maintenance mode while it's doing the upgrade will be suppressed out of vCenter. All of the alerting and functionality for VxRail is passed up into vCenter, so I use that as my single pane of glass for management for my virtual environment. So that concludes the upgrade process. We have a click-through demo that you guys are more than capable of accessing over the public internet, which will walk you through multiple lifecycle management tasks for VxRail. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Nick. So I can show some of the other improvements that we've been working on with VxRail in regards to this. One of the things is, actually, there we go. Make sure I'm recorded. So talking about some of the other improvements we've been working on with VxRail is actually providing physical visibility. So within your vCenter environment, you'll be able to actually see the server, see the individual components if there's failures and things like that, have the visibility into that environment. And previously, if you think about how you would deal with what Nick showed you, you might have had to use other tools. You'd have to do with OpenManage, or you'd have to log in directly into the out-of-bands on these devices. For certain firmware items like drives, you might have had to do something wacky like boot from a CD or an ISO. This is simplifying all those different tasks across the environment that previously would have taken quite a bit. So talking a little bit more about vSAN here, one of as we've moved forward with this whole idea of hyperconverged storage, is that previously in storage environments you have to manage individual LUNs and things like that. And so from a management construct, we've broken that down into this concept of objects. And so in your disks, your VMs, it's fundamentally an object storage platform. And we manage this through a concept called policies. And what these policies look like is you can set different RAID protection levels. You can set things like that. And it brings us down. So on the back end, this is really all kind of invisible to a degree, but it's balancing that space across your cluster. The other thing is previously, you'd have to manage your storage separate for things like data services. And so we've brought that within the existing vCenter management console for things like configuring deduplication and compression, as well as also things like encryption and these other services. We've brought this higher up in regards to this. So now these services, that when you enable this, if you're turning on your encryption or you're turning on your dedupe and compression, this is at a cluster level. And if you're turning these on, I recommend in environments you turn these on at the beginning, just because if you're taking an environment that wasn't deduplicated or wasn't encrypted, you have to shove a lot of data around. So there's a performance overhead. This is going to take quite a bit of time. We recommend that you enable this at the beginning. For anyone who's got compliance needs and things like that, we can hit FIPS 140-2. So, for instance, military type requirements, this is STIG, but also we can handle compliance from that. The other thing with this is previously, if you wanted to make changes to an environment, if anyone had set up a storage array, you'd often set it up, okay, this is RAID 5, this is RAID 6, this is RAID 10. You kind of did this all up front. So your performance, you either chose maybe RAID 10 for performance or RAID 1, or maybe you chose RAID 5 or 6 for capacity. You kind of made trade-offs. And one of the things with this policy-based management system here is we want to have the ability that you can change this after the fact, or you can go very granular and change this. So some examples of this is that, well, previously you couldn't rechange the RAID on a server or in a storage system. With this, you can rechange the object. So on the fly, it'll actually move and shift that data. And if you change this will actually result in that virtual machine changing its layout, and you'll have some visibility into that. Now, to help with some of this, we've made some improvements within the operations to provide additional capabilities in regards to what we can do. So one of the things that we heard from customers was that understanding capacity in their environments was a big deal. if you're doing planning and forecasting, trying to understand where your space is going, we have the ability to see trending, but we also have the ability to drill in and see where that space is going, so to speak. So being able to actually see, how much of this is dedicated to data overhead, how much of this if I'm running things like the iSCSI service, where the overhead in terms of going for that. Also being able to see from the logic of, when we're resyncing data and data is moving across the clusters, you see the little blocks flying in the back end, predict that. If you've ever done large Windows file copies, this is a running joke. You see the file copy dialog box of, it'll say, okay, it's going to take 5 minutes. It's going to take 12 years. It seems to do that. They have actually done a bit of engineering to try to get pretty accurate. So that way, if you've had a failure in your environment, people generally want to know how quickly the environment's going to be back to full health. They've done a much better job of cleaning up that estimation time. Now, I've talked to engineers, and this whole concept of trying to predict resynchronization times across systems with different I/O flows actually is a pretty hard thing. But it is something that they're quite proud of, actually getting some better visibility into this, and also showing these resynchronizations in the environment. It may not just be a failure, but you may have a thing like a rebalance operation. Maybe, TEM, your network admin went and created a bunch of large VMs, and so there needs to rebalance space. Or maybe you've added hosts into the environment, or you've added disks in the environment, and it needs to reshuffle. So having the visibility to understand what's going on with that, as well as also see if there's a failure or something's blocking that failure. Maybe you're out of space to resync. Maybe it's suspended the resynchronization across the environment, the storage. Being able to see what's holding that up. So we're trying to provide more capability from an operational standpoint for the operators to understand what's going on here. Now, the other thing is getting into predictive kind of analysis. So it's one thing to say, okay, we think this copy is going to take a certain amount of time, but also, if you've ever put a vSphere host into maintenance mode, it can take a lot of time, and particularly if you've got storage that has to rebalance and things like that. When you go into maintenance, often, if you work with maybe you've got change control, you've got a cab you've got to work with, or a group that you've got to get approval on, they'll want to understand what those changes are going to look like. So we actually have the ability to simulate what's going to happen when you put an environment in maintenance. And so maybe you're running your cluster a little too full, and putting a host in maintenance mode is going to cause overloading of the environment. This is going to give you a warning before. So previously, you would think about trying to optimize, handling a maintenance failure or a maintenance. It would kick off, it would start going, you'd have that task, and then maybe if you wanted to back out of maintenance mode, you'd have to try to cancel it, or you'd get far into maintenance mode and you wouldn't know, oh, wow, putting this host in the maintenance mode is going to move 10 terabytes, it might take a while or something like that, or maybe if you've got a large host, maybe it's going to move 100 terabytes. And so understanding the implications. When I was in operations and I was young, one of my esteemed colleagues called me a YOLO admin. I would just yell YOLO in the data center and mash update all and walk away. But as I started working on more critical systems, someone at some point put me in charge of a 911 system and things like that. I got to the situation of, okay, we need to sit down and think about what's going to happen when I make these changes. What are the implications of this? And so being able to actually see, what's going to happen when you patch a system, this helps a lot. There's a lot of systems that unfortunately we historically wouldn't patch. We would run these ancient versions of software. They would never get patched. Why didn't we patch? Because we didn't know what was going to happen when we patch. So having the ability to see into the future, see that foresight, see what's going to happen if I initiate a patching cycle, that's pretty handy. So the other thing also is how we handle environments as they start running lower on space. So while we have thresholds for what we recommend for free space within an environment and keeping resources, and this also applies to virtual machines for things like memory placement. Previously, if you start running out of space on a storage array or a storage environment, you'd sometimes get desperate and start shuffling things around and trying to balance that. And while this isn't like the classic way with LUNs, you still have to think about space on the back end. And if you fill up an environment, anyone filled up a storage array, filled up a data store? Yeah. It's a sleepless night, huh? When Windows goes to write a block and there's no available place and the write fails, you get this fun little alert that says writes are failing. And then about 45 seconds later, some system kernel thing would be trying to write, and then boom, blue screen. If you have the same thing happen with Linux, ext4, ext3, these file systems, you try to do writes, can't issue a write to the disk. It doesn't crash. It just goes read-only, which I don't know what the purpose of a read-only file system. That's like a screen door on a submarine. Like it's, who put this here? So one of the challenges we see is, if people have, but this may not have been planning. Maybe you ran out of space because you had multiple concurrent failures in the environment. Maybe you just have something, maybe you can only get budget once every 4 years or something like that. In school districts, common, you only get budget once a year. So you run low on space, trying to manage those out of space conditions. And as we get closer and closer to this, previously this would cause crashing, or we would actually start reshuffling data and reshuffling. And you could kind of get into like a reshuffle storm of it would be frantically on the back end trying to move data around to try to rebalance. It does a much better job in handling those out of space conditions. Now, I would please ask you that you not run your vSAN clusters out of space. Please keep adequate space on storage. We need that. But this will actually, once you do start getting the environment fuller and fuller, it will actually pause resync operations and try to be as space efficient. And actually, it'll make some slight trade-offs on rebuilds and stalling them just so it can not use too much space. Because anytime you're moving data around, you have to build a full copy before you can delete the old copy, and this would cause challenges. As you can see here, my transient space is running out. And then in this case, those rebuilds are going, and now we're into that resync space, and we've gone critical. At this point, this environment would have crashed versus now we're going to say, okay, let's keep stuff where it was. Let's pause that earlier, and let's hold that down. Now, for anyone who's been a vSAN customer for a while, you may have remembered there was this rebalance button that we had in the environment. And people would click it, and then they would say, it's not doing anything. Well, what it did is it would create a window on the back end where for 24 hours it would try to more intelligently rebalance the cluster. This button, there's a fun story. Engineering didn't want to create this, but there were some environments where some people wanted to have a rebalance button. They want to be able to push something. So engineering finally got around to really doing this in a much better way, in a more controlled way. So how vSAN works is if you have a host that is maybe because of where disks were originally created for virtual machines, this one, there's not a lot of space, maybe only 20% of capacity is in use. You've got another, maybe 80%. It would say, okay, we're at 80%, it's time to start reshuffling. But if you had one that was 20% and 50%, we'd say, okay, it's out of balance, but it's not hurting anything. And if you look at DRS, if you look at how we balance compute on the front end, it's a very similar situation. People would actually get angry at DRS and say, it's not working. One host is at 10%, one's at 50. You know what? All performance is being satisfied. And reshuffling things around is expensive. It costs performance. It carries overhead. So we would delay. But if you want to do more proactive rebalancing, we actually have a threshold here. You can see that you can actually adjust that and lower that threshold. Now, please don't go set this on 5% or something. And don't go full Thanos here and try to have everything must be in perfect balance. There's someone in the back who's going to make fun of me later for that joke. But if you've got really large environments and you've got extra resources for that, maybe you want to keep it more even. Maybe you've got very dynamic requirements. You create a lot of VMs, you destroy a lot of VMs, and it bursts up and down. Maybe you want to delay that. This actually gives a little more control here, as well as gives people the ability to control the rebalances without having a button that confuses people, which is probably where we were at before. So previously, when you would make changes in a vSAN environment and you would change the RAID types and things like that, I would always tell people, create a new policy and then move things there, because the reason why that is if you had a policy that had 400 VMs attached to it and you went from RAID 1 to RAID 5, you're now telling 500 VMs to completely alter their disk layout. This is going to burst capacity. It's going to spin I/O all over the place. We do a much better job of actually batching this process. And also, if you think about it, if you've got, say, a RAID 1 mirror, you've got 2 copies of data, now you want to build RAID 5, I can't actually use any of those blocks that existed before. I'm going to build a whole 3+1 stripe over here. So at this point, I'm going to be 3.25x of my raw capacity. It's actually going to burst a lot up. Now it's going to batch those. It's going to move those in groups selectively and control that. So if you do want to change large sets of policies, it will be safer in regards to that. It's also going to do this in groups and make the decisions about space placement, because previously you'd have every individual VM thread trying to make a decision about where to go. Now it's going to look at them as a group, which is going to help and make sure we don't actually run out of space in any one area in regards to that. anyone using Microsoft SQL clustering, FCI, Windows File Server clusters? I see some guys in the corner here. So I always joked, because I used to be a SQL admin with the 2005 and 2003 era, I always joked that the clustering actually caused more downtime than it solved. But I will give Microsoft credit, starting with 2008, and also with 2012, the FCI clustering. It's a pretty resilient solution here in regards to that. I think there we go. So, but the issue with this is you need to have a shared volume. And VMDKs, sharing them between different virtual machines was problematic in the past. You had to have both VMs on the same box. So the problem is when that box failed, you would lose both copies of your SQL cluster, which is, kind of undermines the entire purpose of clustering SQL if the entire cluster has to exist inside one box. So from this perspective, we realized that, people wanted to be able to have shared volumes. So we originally came out with the vSAN iSCSI service. This lets you provide a shared LUN, but bringing back old storage concepts to solve, a system that was supposed to banish them, so to speak, doesn't really help the situation. And so what we now have the ability to do is actually share a VMDK, do that what's called SCSI-3 persistent reservation, SCSI-3 PR locking, and do this to a single VMDK from multiple hosts and not make all these compromises. You can snapshot the VMs. In theory, VADP and your backup APIs and so forth will actually work. Although you have to work with your backup vendor if they'll support this. But this will allow for Oracle clustering, RAC clusters. This will allow for SQL FCI clusters. This will allow file server clusters and things like that. What's fun about this feature is this feature actually first came in within VMware Cloud on AWS. So this was a feature that actually shipped first in the cloud because there were some customers that are demanding it. And this is actually something kind of to think about from a vSAN perspective. Even if you never use our cloud offering, VMware Cloud and AWS, the things that we're working on and we're tested, they're actually getting tested there on some of the biggest Fortune 100 clients before they make it out into the real world. So you're benefiting from that scale operation and testing of those other people in regards to this. Now the iSCSI service, we have made some improvements to this. In 6.7U1, we made the failover a lot faster. We now have the ability to resize on the fly volumes. That was something that was missing. That was pretty critical there in regards to that. The other one also is integration with vRealize Operations. vRealize Operations is our monitoring and management suite. We have the ability from vCenter now. You'll actually see starting around, I think it's 6.7 update 1, you'll see a tab that says vRealize Operations. And if you click that, you can say, I want to deploy this. Now, historically with VMware, deploying any new appliance meant you had to log into my VMware, go download an OVA, feed in a bunch of stuff, spin that up, deploy that. This actually has a really nice driven wizard, and hopefully this is the shape of things to come for a lot of other VMware solutions, of being able to say, I want to deploy vRealize Operations, and it'll actually go find the OVA for you. You put in your credentials. You put in the IPs and the host names, and it'll automate that deployment. There's some additional customization we have with this. But this tool is really cool. While vSAN has native monitoring, the ability to see performance on an individual cluster level, vRealize Operation helps you with planning capacity when you have multiple clusters. Maybe you've got lots of different retail branch sites, things like that. It can provide a lot of help. Now this next tool, this is something that's been around for a while, but for the longest time we didn't really talk about it because it was an internal tool. So we've been doing a lot to actually try to make vSAN a much more easy to consume product. Obviously, the work we do with VxRail, we have the vSAN health alarms and health services, the performance and these things, but we also wanted to make support a lot better. So how many of you have ever called support, your VMware support, or any vendor support, and typically they'll ask you a couple questions, and then the question comes up, they'll say, can you send us the logs? And then they'll say, can you send us some more logs? And then someone says, you got some logs from last week? And then they'll disappear for a while, and what you assume is someone furiously hitting Control F in Notepad or grepping. I swear they have better tooling from that, but that's historically how support works, is basically you have an environment, it runs until something blows up, and then you call support, and then you have to ship these logs. And there's some challenge of this. Maybe the logs, maybe they caught on fire too. Maybe you weren't logging. You were logging to memory, which isn't persistent apparently, and things like that. So we actually have a phone home system that we call Support Insight. This actually is enabled by default within the environment. And I'm going to do something that we don't normally do. I'm actually going to show you what the backend looks like and show you what support can see. And this is for kind of a couple of reasons. One, I want to help demystify some fears, and I'm sure questions will come up on this in the Q&A. But this is one of my clusters in the environment. and they can see this environment. One thing I want to call out is if you look here on the left, see how I promise I'm not this mundane in my naming. My host names are generally much more exciting than this. This is actually what's called obfuscating, which is a word generally I can't pronounce 3 times fast. But this means it's stripping away anything that's identifiable. So if you give the support your cluster unique identifier, it's in the UI, they can find your environment. And then from here, they can go look at the health. They can see what the alarms are. They can see the performance. They can see the configuration. They can see what kind of disks you have. They can look over your shoulder, so to speak, at the health alarm, see if anything's wrong in the environment. And in this case, they can also see if things have changed. So this cluster's technically running fine, but we actually had earlier, 45 minutes ago, we actually had some errors related to networking. And so if we want to drill into that, they can actually see what's going on. They can give you the kbeta reference. In this case, I'm looking at my networking. We want to troubleshoot this environment. We're going to do this live, so we're going to see what's wrong with this environment. Now, if we see networking, maybe it might be network firmware, maybe it might be network driver, maybe there's something wrong with one host. But if we look here, we're seeing this on different host numbers, host 61, 55. This is multiple hosts. So let's dig in a little more. Some of you may recognize this is Grafana. Yeah, it's a tool we use internally. And I can see there's latency popping up on some of the hosts. And I'm actually going to drill into the networking. And from here, I can actually see we're getting some error rates. We're getting receive errors. So we're actually getting port drops. It's not a whole lot. It's not a huge amount relative to the number of packets I'm pushing, but it's enough that it's causing latency to back up. And since I'm seeing this across multiple hosts, I'd probably recommend for you to go look at your switches, look at your switch log, see if you're getting buffer exhaustion. Maybe the switches are struggling. Maybe they're not fast enough or something like that, as well as also look at the events and the health and the configuration there. That would shape that. Previously, I would play 20 questions with you. You would send me some logs, and I might get back to you in 2 hours with a recommendation. This allows us in real time to look at an environment and even go back in time and see, maybe it's healthy now, but maybe it wasn't yesterday. See what was going on in that environment. Now, if you don't want to have to play, secret code talker and talking about host names with this, you can send them the obfuscation map and send that to your support person, and they can walk through that environment with you and help you in regards to that. But in this case, we're going to play secret code talker and things like that. So we can even go through the networking. You'll see these 3-word code phrases which help with that. And that if you actually go into that obfuscation map, which is within the vCenter file, you can download it. This can be turned into an actual switch name or port group or something like that. So that's support insight. That's one of the things we're doing to help make support a much more proactive experience and help with the environments a bit in terms of that visibility. So beyond this, we're also looking at ways on enhancing performance. So we're doing some things to enhance the predictability of performance. Previously, with vSAN releases, we'd say, thump our chest and say, "Rawr, we've hit 50% better write performance or better read performance, or we can hit a maximum of 1 million IOPS on a cluster, or 100,000. And these were great boastful numbers if you understand what they mean, I guess. But one of the things with applications is when they're also looking for latency consistency. Has anyone had an environment where performance was bad, but everyone was just used to it? I had an environment once where logins took 3 minutes. Everyone thought it took 3 minutes to log into Windows. That was just a normal expectation that someone had somehow set. The challenge was we fixed it. We got it down. We got 5-second logins, except 1 out of 20 logins would be 45 seconds. You know what? That people got angry because it was inconsistently fast. And so this is something with particularly applications, your mainline, your ERPs, your databases, not only being fast, but being consistently fast is something that's important. So we're working on evening out that performance. I joke, you need Bolsheviks in your data center. You need to have consistent, storage socialism. You need to have consistent latencies for everyone in all applications here. We were also improving the write throughput and the D stage on that. So we're looking at how vSAN works. You've got a 2-tier, you've got a cache system. So data destages from the cache and goes to the back end. And we've been tweaking this. And this is also not only helping with a performance consistency, but also a write throughput. And so particularly for anyone who's using deduping compression, which carries a certain amount of what we call write amplification, there's extra overhead on writes. This is significantly making improvements within 6.7, update 3, the newest release, in regards to that, on smoothing out that performance and making it much more consistent. So for people who previously might have run really high write throughput operations, or they had bursty writes, maybe you would do database clone operations, or you had large copy jobs and things like that, they might have shied away from dedupe compression. This is going to make that feature have much less overhead in regards to that, from that perspective. The other thing also that we ran into, and this was kind of a weird performance quirk, and as you chase down your 11th or your 12th version of software, you start finding, okay, there are these, kind of quirks in environments. One thing we saw was resynchronization. So if you had a large cluster, you had a lot of VMs, resyncs would be pretty fast. But if you you didn't put a lot of load on an environment, maybe you had a small cluster with a small number of VMs, it was irrespective of hardware. What we found is there was a maximum amount of data that a single TCP channel could support. And so what we do now is we look at the amount of, when you have a failure, of a host fail or a drive fail, and we actually dynamically assign TCP channels based on that failure type. And so if there's not a lot of objects or a lot of components that need to be resynced, we'll actually turn up and add more parallelization. And so in this way, we can actually make the network a bottleneck again, versus instead kind of overly throttling ourselves. In vSAN, every release has always found a new way to improve the resynchronization, improve copy speed, and things like that. But this is, again, one of those little things that helps increase the consistency of the outcome in that experience in regards to that. As you can see, I've got my resynchronization going here, and we're looking at this. We realized there wasn't enough data needing to be resynced, so we're going to open more channels. We're going to make that faster. Now, VMware admins have been around for a long time. They're obviously used to some of the nice, pretty management tools, but like vRealize operations. But sometimes you want to get down and dirty. And so if you've ever used ESXtop, this is a CLI tool, really good low-level metrics and things like that. There was a little bit of vSAN in there. There was some basic latency, some I/O operations a second, but not a lot. And we looked at expanding ESXtop to do more with vSAN. We decided, let's actually make an entire vSAN top tool. And if you've worked with Linux, top is a tool you use for looking at resource utilization. So we've actually expanded that out. So if you're wanting to get real low level, and where this comes in is traditional performance tooling, they might poll every 5 or 15 seconds, or maybe they roll up to a minute. If you're trying to troubleshoot something in real time, you want a real-time count. So this is going to give you that direct raw feed of the real-time performance count in regards to that, and give you that. So again, for that, you really were trying to get the most out of your environment. You're trying to get the real-time view of that. You've got a user on the phone. You've nailed it down there. Now, vRealize operations is still going to be really powerful with this, just because if you've got a user call in, maybe it's a VDI environment, you start that call, you say, okay, you've got vRealize operations, and it's got the Horizon content packs, or you're monitoring the VDI. You can see, okay, what's the latency look like to the remote connection? You can work your way backwards, basically. Okay, or my firewall is causing problems. You can then look at the hosts themselves. Okay, the hosts are at good CPU utilization. Okay, the virtual machine this user is logged into has storage issues. You can trace that all the way down to an individual device. You can see within vSAN where the component lies. And then at that point, you could go into that viewpoint of that vSAN top in regards to that. Now, this is something that's still very much a future state. Anyone heard Kubernetes this week? Or a lot? It's like the new... Someone can yell bingo. It's safe. So, no, it's fine. VMware, we obviously, not everyone... I'll preface this and say containers have a lot of hype right now. It can be kind of annoying hearing about them a lot. But it is something that is definitely coming. It's something we view as very important, and we want to make sure we take leadership in, and we're doing a lot with. For those of you who do work in the container space, you work with Docker, you've sometimes heard this terrible analogy that's kind of morbid, where people describe, okay, you've got applications that are like pets, which are your traditional applications that you love and like, and you try to make resilient, and then you've got cattle that you basically, whenever you have a problem with, you shoot them, which is, I guess, a very Texan analogy, but a bit morbid. Probably shouldn't play as well in California as I'd expect, but the thing here is that the reality is when we actually look at what people are doing with containers in the real world, is people are putting persistent data in them. They're running databases. They're running real things. They're running NoSQL. Talking to Datadog, who does a lot of the stats on this, over half the use cases for containers are actually persistent sets of data. And so for that, we figured people probably want persistent volumes. They want to be able to have And while the container that may front that data may be a bit inferior, it may be reset and changed over, the data needs to live past. And historically, to do this required a lot of Docker wizardry and things like that, or this was not something that would scale very well with the speed of which anyone have developers they have to deal with. Containers can often lead to what I call a devs gone wild situation, where they just start provisioning things and you don't even know what's going on anymore. So you need to be able to kind of meet them in the middle and meet the developer and the container admins where they are. And so we have the ability to automate using the same policy engine we use for vSAN. We can create policies that will actually appear within that Kubernetes, that YAML, that configuration, that manifest of what it is, and say, okay, I want this level. I want a gold policy that provides me resiliency and this performance. And the container person never has to learn VMware. And inversely, the VMware person, they can actually, when these volumes are created within the environment, it'll create them automatically. But if you're trying to troubleshoot something, if the Kubernetes, your developer, admin, they give you that key value pair and say, this is the volume I'm having problems with, it'll immediately take you to that VMDK that's backing it and give you that visibility and that ability to do that. So this whole idea that we're all going to become developer Kubernetes CI/CD ninjas overnight is probably a bit overplayed. At the same time, we need to provide tooling to our existing traditional sysadmins as well as our developers so that they have visibility across. That's our evil plan with containers. You've caught us, so to speak, in regards to that. And there's definitely more coming in regards to this, our plans for this. We're trying to make a storage platform that not only covers your traditional applications, but also what we call cloud native, which is this overarching marketing term, so to speak, for this. And within this environment, previously we had a system that was called Project Hatchway that would it was some stuff that we'd checked into Kubernetes and with Docker to handle this. There's now a system called Container Storage Interface. This is basically a bridge. If you work in Kubernetes or if you worked with containers, they've got Kubernetes networking interface. It's a similar construct that allows basically this plugin to connect you with the storage policies, and then at that point you don't have to go do anything else. It's going to automate that quite a bit. And this example of what this looks like in this case is I've got some container volumes here that I've created. And within these, I can actually see the labels. It's kind of hard to read, but this is a MongoDB app. This is a primary copy. This is the primary that's been deployed. And that name is going to be unique, that's something the developer can key back. So again, if I'm trying to troubleshoot my containers, my applications, this can help quite a bit. So I'm going to end here with couple things. One, just want to talk a little bit about our vision, kind of where we plan to go with vSAN. We want this to be a storage platform that can expand. We've got the existing great servers we work with Dell today in the industry. We're already leveraging things like Intel Optane, these next generation platforms, but we also want to keep evolving with that. There's some really cool stuff coming with servers. For a long time, x86 servers were kind of just the same thing over and over again, a little bit faster, but these, go by the Dell truck, you'll actually see this DIMM, like it looks like a memory DIMM that has 128 gigabytes of ultra faster. It's not even flash. It's a whole new class of persistent memory and things like that. So we're working to leverage that stuff and take advantage of that as well as possible. Also be able to wrangle these cloud native applications and also provide more application services. So be able to pierce through and provide more visibility all the way to the application layer of what's going on. In regards to some resources, obviously, again, come by the truck. Ivan and my friends will be there. We've also got hands-on labs. We've got test drives. If you go to storagehub.vmware.com, there's a lot of resources my team puts together. And lastly, it would not be a presentation I talk about without plugging selfishly my own podcast. So if any of you have 25 to 30-minute commutes, I like to say you're our core demographic for this. My co-hosts and Pete and I, we talk through the industry. We interview people across this. We just had VMworld. We interviewed, we'll interview someone like we had Michael Dell there, but we'll also get people, who are niche experts on things like security and networking and other areas and try to break down what's going on for this.
You guys already went over 2 million listeners, right?
Yeah, there's a few, so. I think we're at about 10,000 downloads a week or something, so at this point. It's a pretty good run rate, so. Actually, I had this gentleman on talking about what he's doing with virtual volumes when we were at VMworld. So some good stuff. So with that, if anyone has any questions, I've got a microphone here that we can pass to you. Ask any questions. It's no pressure. Just run the mic here. Can you pass this?
I'm just curious if Dell has any plans on introducing a backup solution within their solution.
So what are Dell's plans for backup? So Dell actually just had some announcements about backup. There's a new appliance. 4400. There we go.
Correct. So DP4400 is the new appliance. And we have lots of stuff coming out. Right. So Power Protect came out at Dell World. So we have details on that in the truck as well. Okay. Any more questions? Yes.
There is a VxRail in the truck.
Yeah, we have 5 nodes of VxRail in the truck.
You can touch it. You can't lick it. There's always that weird guy that wants to lick the memory DIMMs. I don't know why. We always run into him, but no. It's the risk you take when you bring hardware to a conference.
So the connectivity on your the vSANs, do you support both like iSCSI networking and direct attached to them, or? So
the networking, it's use Ethernet between the nodes. It's just a regular VM kernel port. We don't use iSCSI or NFS. We actually speak our own language because we don't need the overhead of those protocols. And iSCSI is actually ancient. It's like almost as old as I am. I mean, if you look at it, iSCSI is actually tied to SCSI, which is a serial I/O bus, NVMe, and all this other stuff, persistent memory. We would be actually kind of handicapping ourselves to a lot of unnecessary CPU overhead. We could have used NFS, I guess, but again, it's not designed for multi-queue unless you did PNFS, which isn't really a real standard. So no, we actually run our own vSAN protocol. It's called Reliable Datagram Transport is the actual internal name for the network transport between the nodes. But from a VMware admin stance, you create a VM kernel port, you'll tag it for vSAN, and that's it. That's what you do for networking between the nodes. Well, if you do a 2-node, you can direct connect. So the question is if this direct. If you had just two nodes, you direct connect. If you have more than 2 nodes, we don't want to create this weird spider mesh of a bunch of cables. So for that, we use what everyone has for years, a switch. Well, switches. We like 2 because if storage networks drop, we get back to read-only file systems and blue screen Windows. So. Any more questions?
If you guys don't have questions, make sure to stop by Dell Truck if you haven't been there yet. So the truck is, this week here, but it's going to move on and go around the country. So we're going to be in California next week. It pretty much goes through almost every state every year. So make sure, when it comes to your town, stop by. We're always welcoming spice heads. So
Ivan lives on the truck, actually. He sleeps in the cab. So.
Almost. I'm with the truck about twice a quarter.
Eastbound and down, playing over the speakers. Yeah, no, it's him flying down the road.
Yeah, I love the truck, right? So John and I set up the little rack that you guys have. We put it together a year and a half ago at Dell World with vSAN radio nodes and VxRail. So, it's close.
Yeah, we were
to
trying to find patch cables in Vegas. I'm like, where are we going to find patch cables?
Yeah, it was hard. So we had to ship stuff from all over the country. So make sure to stop by. Also, Dell Tech Forums, make sure to monitor our schedule because we're, going around the country with those. And that's like mini Dell World. So if you didn't have a chance to join Dell for Dell World, you can join us, in the smaller events like Dell Tech Forum, which I believe in 2 weeks is going to be in Dallas. So again, any feedback? What's that?
New York today. So.
Yeah, New York today. Yeah, so again, make sure any feedback you guys have, we're always looking out. I'm, a green guy for Dell on Spice Forum, so always, looking forward to hear more feedback from you all. Because without hearing from customers, we can't provide the right solutions, right? So the feedback that we get from you guys is really vital to what we do. Have everyone got the socks, VxRail socks, right? We're also going to give away, I'm not sure if we're going to raffle it now or sometime later after the session, is the Nintendo Switch. Somebody will get it. What's it?
Okay.
Awesome. Do you guys hear that? Make sure
you're scanned and then come by the truck.
Scan your
at
badge
5.
before you leave, and we will, pull a winner. Right? So, again, thank you guys so much. And if you are interested in VxRail, let us know, and we will hook you guys up with one of the engineers.